Unexpected encounter. The twin suns of Proxima Centauri cast long shadows across the dense foliage of Research Station Delta 9. Dr. Ethan Hayes wiped sweat from his brow as he meticulously catalogued a newly discovered species of phosphorescent fungi. 3 years into his 5-year botanical research mission, Ethan had grown accustomed to the solitude of the remote outpost. The company of 5 other scientists and the occasional supply ship was all the human interaction he needed, or so he thought. Atmospheric disturbance detected, announced HFY, the station's eye. Unknown vessel entering atmosphere at coordinates 32 to 4791. Trajectory indicates probable crash landing. Ethan glanced up from his microscope, furrowing his brow. "Show me." A holographic display flickered to life, showing a small craft tumbling through the atmosphere, trailing smoke and debris. Its design was unfamiliar, definitely not human. Projected crash site is approximately 3.7 kilometers west of your position. HFY continued. Survival probability for occupants, 48.2%. Ethan hesitated. Protocol dictated non-interference with extraterrestrial vessels without clearance from Earth Command. But clearance would take hours, and by then, whoever was aboard would likely be dead. HFY, prep the medical kit and alert Dr. Sharma, he said, grabbing his field pack. "I'm heading to the crash site." "Dr. Hayes, I must remind you that protocol." "Someone could be dying out there," Ethan interrupted. "Log my violation if you want, but I'm going." The journey through the dense jungle was arduous. Ethan pushed through hanging vines and navigated around the massive root systems of ancient trees. The humid air clung to his skin as he followed the coordinates on his wrist device. The sound of creaking metal and sparking electronics guided him the final 100 meters. The ship had carved a deep furrow through the jungle before coming to rest against a massive tree trunk. It was smaller than he'd expected, perhaps a scout vessel or personal transport. The design was elegant, with sweeping lines that reminded him of predatory sea creatures from Earth. "Hello," Ethan called out, approaching cautiously. "I'm from the Human Research Outpost. I'm here to help." No response came from the vessel. A section of the hull had been torn open, creating a jagged entry point. Ethan climbed through, wincing as a piece of sharp metal caught his sleeve. The interior was dim, lit only by flickering emergency lights and the glow from damaged control panels. A single pilot's seat was positioned at the front, and slumped within it was a figure. "Can you hear me?" Ethan asked, moving closer. The figure stirred weakly. As Ethan approached, he realized this was no human. The being was roughly humanoid but slightly taller than an average human. Its skin was a deep indigo color with subtle iridescent patterns that shifted with each labored breath. A thick, silvery fluid, presumably blood, seeped from a wound in its side. When the alien turned to look at him, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Despite the alien physiology, the face held an undeniably feminine quality. Large, silver-flecked eyes regarded him with equal parts suspicion and desperation. "Stay back," the alien said, her voice melodic despite the obvious pain. To Ethan's surprise, she spoke in nearly perfect English. "You're hurt," Ethan said, raising his empty hands to show he was unarmed. "I'm a doctor. Well, not a medical doctor, but I have training." "Let me help you." The alien's hand moved to a weapon at her side. "Your kind. Allied with Kavarians." "Kavarians? I don't know who that is," Ethan replied honestly. "I'm just a botanist from Earth. My name is Ethan Hayes." For several tense moments, the alien studied him, her silver eyes seeming to peer into his soul. Finally, her hand dropped from her weapon. "Niera," she said, pressing her 3-fingered hand against her wound. "Valdorian Defense Force." Her voice weakened. "Need. Sanctuary." Before Ethan could respond, Niera slumped forward, unconscious. Her silver blood continued to seep through her fingers. "Araya," Ethan called into his communicator. "I've found a survivor. Humanoid, but definitely not human. Female, unconscious, with a significant wound to the left abdomen. I'm bringing her in. Dr. Hayes, Dr. Sharma's voice cut in. Have you lost your mind? You can't bring an unknown alien to the station. She'll die if I leave her, Ethan replied, already working to stabilize Naira. And she spoke English, Sharma. She asked for sanctuary. This is against every protocol. Then file a report, Ethan snapped. I need a medical bay prepared in 20 minutes. Getting Naira back to the station was a challenge. Though slender, her dense musculature made her heavier than she appeared. By the time Ethan arrived at the station's airlock, his clothes were soaked with sweat and spotted with silver blood. Dr. Lindu Sharma, the station's medical officer, waited with a hover gurney, her expression a mixture of professional curiosity and deep concern. This is madness, she muttered, helping transfer Naira onto the gurney. But I took an oath to preserve life. I suppose that extends to aliens too. In the medical bay, they worked together to assess Naira's injuries. The wound appeared to be from some kind of energy weapon, cauterized around the edges, but deep enough to damage what Sharma guessed was the equivalent of a liver. Her cellular structure is fascinating, Sharma murmured, looking at the medical scans. Similar to ours, but with significant differences. Her blood contains elements I've never seen before. And look at this, she pointed to neural scans. Her brain activity is off the charts even while unconscious. Will she survive? Ethan asked. I think so, Sharma replied. Her physiology seems to have remarkable regenerative properties, but I'm working blind here. I've never treated a Valdorian before. What about nutrition? Ethan asked. When she wakes, she'll need to eat. I have no idea what's safe for her, Sharma admitted. We'll have to wait until she's conscious and can tell us. For the next 3 days, Ethan divided his time between his research and checking on Naira. The other scientists regarded their alien guest with varying degrees of curiosity and apprehension. Station Director Chen had already transmitted a full report to Earth Command, and they were awaiting a response. On the morning of the 4th day, Ethan entered the medical bay to find Naira sitting upright, disconnected from the monitors, her silver eyes alert and wary. You're awake, Ethan said, smiling with relief. How do you feel? Functional, Naira replied, her voice stronger than before. You saved my life. Dr. Sharma did most of the work, Ethan admitted. I just got you here. Naira's gaze was intense. You risked much to help an unknown entity. Why? The question caught Ethan off guard. Because you needed help, he said simply. I couldn't just let you die. Naira seemed to consider this, her head tilting slightly. Such behavior is uncommon where I come from. Are you hungry? Ethan asked, changing the subject. We weren't sure what you could eat. I require sustenance, Naira admitted. My species can process most carbon-based organic matter. Plants are preferable. Ethan smiled. Well, you're in luck. I'm a botanist. Plants are my specialty. He returned shortly with a tray containing various fruits and vegetables from both Earth and those cultivated from local flora that had been deemed safe for human consumption. Naira examined each item carefully before selecting a bright purple fruit native to the planet. She sniffed it cautiously, then took a small bite. Her silver eyes widened slightly. This is pleasant, she said, sounding almost surprised. We call it starfruit, Ethan explained. Not the same as Earth starfruit, but similar in shape. As Naira ate, Ethan noticed the intricate patterns on her skin seemed to glow faintly. Your markings, they're beautiful, he said before he could stop himself. Naira paused mid-bite, regarding him curiously. They are status indicators among my people. They show lineage, rank, and life experiences. Like tattoos. No, Naira corrected. They develop naturally throughout our lives, changing with significant events and achievements. She pointed to a complex whorl pattern near her collarbone. This appeared after my first successful combat mission. As Naira continued eating, Ethan asked the question that had been bothering him. How do you speak our language so well? Valdorians are linguistic adapters, she explained. We can assimilate languages through brief exposure. I monitored your communication frequencies during my approach to this planet. That's remarkable, Ethan said, genuinely impressed. So why did you come here? Your ship didn't look like it crashed by accident. Nyara's expression darkened. She set down the fruit she'd been eating and straightened her posture. I was pursued by Kavarian hunters, she said gravely. My mission was compromised. I chose this planet because it is far from established trade routes and has a small human research presence that might provide temporary shelter. Hunters. Mission. Ethan frowned. Who exactly are you, Nyara? Nyara's silver eyes met his. I am Commander Nyara Vexel of the Valdorian Defense Force Special Operations Division. I carry information vital to the survival of both our species. The gravity of her words hung in the air between them. The Kavarians, she continued, are a militaristic empire that has been systematically conquering worlds on the outer rim of your explored space. Their technology is vastly superior to human capabilities. And they're coming here? Ethan asked, his mouth suddenly dry. They followed me, Nyara confirmed, her expression grim. I damaged their vessel in the upper atmosphere, but they will have sent a distress signal. More will come. Before Ethan could respond, the station's alarm began to wail. Director Chen's voice came over the intercom system. Unidentified vessels approaching from the north. All personnel to emergency stations. This is not a drill. Nyara stood, ignoring the obvious pain from her still healing wound. They have found me sooner than expected, she said. Her eyes locked with Ethan's. You should never have saved me. Now your people will suffer for your kindness. But Ethan didn't regret his decision, even as the distant sound of approaching aircraft grew louder. In saving Nyara, he had unwittingly placed his station, and perhaps all of humanity, in the crosshairs of an interstellar conflict. Yet looking at the wounded warrior before him, standing tall despite her injuries, ready to face her pursuers, he couldn't find it in himself to wish he had acted differently. What he didn't know then was that the simple act of feeding a hungry, wounded alien warrior would alter the course of two civilizations, and that the bond forged in these moments would transcend both stars and species. Alliance of necessity. We need to move, Nyara said, her voice cutting through the blaring alarms. She moved with surprising agility for someone who had been critically wounded just days earlier. My presence here endangers everyone. Ethan grabbed her arm. You're not fully healed. Where do you think you're going? To face them, she replied simply. It is me they want. That's suicide, Ethan argued, tightening his grip. The muscles beneath her indigo skin were tense, like coiled springs ready to release. We need a plan. The station shuddered as something struck nearby. The lights flickered momentarily before the backup systems engage. Dr. Sharma burst into the medical bay, her face etched with panic. They're landing. Chen is attempting communication, but they're not responding to any frequency. Nyara's expression hardened. They will not communicate. Kavarians do not negotiate with what they consider lesser species. Lesser. Sharma looked offended. It is their belief, not mine, Nyara clarified. To them, all non-Kavarians are either threats to eliminate or resources to exploit. Another impact rocked the station. The distant sound of metal being torn apart echoed through the corridors. They've breached the north airlock. Araya's calm voice announced. Hostiles are entering the facility. Ethan made a quick decision. Sharma, get to the emergency shuttle with the others. Take all the research data you can carry. What about you? Sharma asked, already moving toward the storage cabinets to retrieve critical samples. I'm staying with Nyara, he said, surprising even himself with his resolve. She says she has information that could help defend against these Kavarians. We need to make sure that information reaches Earth. Sharma looked like she wanted to argue, but instead nodded curtly. There's a communication relay station 80 kilometers south in the mountain range. It has a more powerful transmitter that could reach the nearest human outpost. If you can get there, we will, Ethan promised. As Sharma hurried away, Naira turned to Ethan with a questioning look. You would risk your life for information you know nothing about. I'm risking my life for you, Ethan corrected, then quickly added. And for my species, if what you say about these Kavarians is true. A series of high-pitched whines echoed through the corridor outside. Energy weapons being discharged. We need weapons, Naira said, looking around the medical bay. Ethan moved to a locked cabinet and pressed his palm against the scanner. It clicked open, revealing the standard-issue pulse rifle and sidearm. Research stations in unexplored territories always have some protection, he explained, handing her the rifle. I'm guessing you know how to use this better than I do. Naira examined the weapon with professional efficiency, quickly familiarizing herself with its mechanism. Primitive, but functional, she assessed. Your weapon's technology is at least 2 centuries behind the Kavarians. That's comforting, Ethan muttered, checking the charge on the sidearm. There's an emergency exit through the hydroponics lab. We can take the all-terrain vehicle from there. They moved quietly through the corridors, the sounds of destruction growing louder. Through a viewport, Ethan caught a glimpse of the attackers for the first time. The Kavarians were imposing figures, taller than humans, with exoskeletal armor that seemed fused to their bodies. Their elongated heads housed 4 glowing eyes positioned for maximum field of vision, and instead of hands, they possessed 3-pronged appendages that appeared both dexterous and deadly. They're searching room by room, Ethan whispered as they ducked behind a storage unit. Looking for you and eliminating witnesses, Naira confirmed grimly. Kavarians leave no evidence of their presence in undeveloped territories. It allows them to claim innocence before galactic governance bodies. They reached the hydroponics lab to find it already in shambles. The carefully cultivated plants that had been Ethan's life's work lay in ruins, trampled and scattered across the floor. He felt a pang of loss but pushed it aside. There were more important concerns now. The all-terrain vehicle was still intact in its bay. As they approached it, a Kavarian soldier emerged from behind the growth chambers. Without hesitation, Naira raised the rifle and fired, the pulse blast striking the alien squarely in the chest. It staggered backward but didn't fall. The chest plate absorbs energy, Naira shouted, already adjusting her aim. Her second shot hit the Kavarian's unprotected neck joint. This time, it collapsed with a high-pitched screech that made Ethan's ears ring. We need to hurry, Naira urged, already moving toward the vehicle. The ATV roared to life as Ethan engaged the ignition. The rear bay door opened automatically, revealing the dense jungle beyond. He gunned the engine, and they shot out of the station just as another explosion rocked the building behind them. Head south, Naira instructed, her eyes constantly scanning the tree line as they sped through the dense foliage. They will have sentries monitoring the perimeter. Ethan navigated the difficult terrain as best he could, the ATV bouncing over roots and splashing through shallow streams. Above them, the twin suns were beginning to set, casting long shadows through the forest canopy. If we can make it to the mountains by nightfall, Ethan said, we might have a chance. The relay station is built into the cliff face, defensible position with only one approach. Naira nodded, wincing slightly as the vehicle hit a particularly rough patch of ground. Her wound, though healing rapidly, still pained her. You should eat something, Ethan said, noticing her discomfort. Without taking his eyes off the treacherous path ahead, he reached into his pack and pulled out a nutrient bar, handing it to her. Naira accepted it, examining the packaging curiously before unwrapping it. Your concern for my well-being is unexpected, she said after taking the small bite. Is it? Ethan glanced at her briefly. Don't Valdorians look after their injured? We do, Naira replied. But I am a warrior. On my world, warriors are expected to endure without complaint. Comfort is seen as unnecessary. Sounds like a harsh way to live, Ethan commented. It is efficient, Naira countered, though without much conviction. Your way is different. The way you share food, the attention to taste and enjoyment. It is considered a distraction in Valdorian military culture. They lapsed into silence, the only sounds the rumble of the ATV's engine and the calls of native wildlife as twilight descended. After about an hour, Ethan slowed the vehicle as they approached a small clearing. We should rest here briefly, he suggested. The terrain gets more difficult ahead, and I'd rather navigate it with fresh eyes. Naira surveyed the area with a tactical gaze before nodding her agreement. A short rest only. The Kavarians will have tracked the vehicle's heat signature by now. They concealed the ATV beneath a canopy of large leaf plants and settled in a small hollow formed by the massive roots of an ancient tree. Ethan distributed water and more food from his pack. As they ate in silence, he found himself studying Naira's features in the fading light. The patterns on her skin seemed to pulse gently, responding to her heart rate, or perhaps her emotions. Why are the Kavarians hunting you specifically? Ethan finally asked. What information do you carry that's so important? Naira was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. The Kavarians have developed a new weapon, she eventually said. A biological agent designed to target specific genetic markers. They can engineer it to affect only certain species. Like a designer plague, Ethan murmured, the implications dawning on him. Exactly. My mission was to infiltrate one of their research facilities and obtain proof of its existence. The Valdorian High Command received intelligence that humans are among their intended targets. But why? Humans haven't even encountered Kavarians before. Your expansion into the outer systems threatens their planned conquest routes, Naira explained. They prefer to eliminate potential opposition before direct contact. It is efficient. The clinical way she delivered this horrifying information sent a chill down Ethan's spine. And you risk your life to warn us. Why would Valdorians care about human survival? My people have observed yours for decades, Naira said, her silver eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. We see potential in humanity that the Kavarians fear. Where they see only chaos in your diversity, we see adaptability. Where they see weakness in your emotions, we see strength in your connections. A distant whining sound interrupted their conversation. Naira tensed, her hand moving to the rifle beside her. Kavarian scouts, she whispered. They're using gravity propulsion drones. Ethan peered up through the canopy but could see nothing in the darkening sky. How many? At least 3, judging by the sound patterns, Naira replied. We should move. The night will provide some cover, and the mountains aren't far. They returned to the ATV, now operating with minimal lights to avoid detection. The terrain became increasingly rugged as they approached the foothills of the mountain range. Large boulders and steep inclines forced them to slow their pace. There, Ethan pointed to a narrow ravine ahead. That leads to the relay station. As they approached the ravine, a blinding light suddenly illuminated the area around them. A Kavarian scout drone hovered directly above, its spotlight fixed on their position. Move, Naira shouted, raising her rifle and firing at the drone. The shot connected, causing the machine to spiral out of control before crashing into the trees nearby. But the damage was done. The distant sound of larger engines growing louder indicated that the main Kavarian force had been alerted to their location. Ethan pushed the ATV to its limits, the engine whining in protest as they raced toward the ravine. The narrow passage barely accommodated the vehicle's width, scraping against rock walls on both sides as they navigated its twisting course. More drones incoming, Naira warned, her enhanced vision spotting them before Ethan could. She fired precisely, taking down another drone, but 2 more appeared to replace it. Energy blasts from the drones struck the ground around them, sending dirt and stone fragments flying. One blast hit too close, causing Ethan to swerve sharply. The ATV tipped precariously on 2 wheels before slamming back down. Almost there, Ethan called out, seeing the ravine widen ahead. They emerged into a small plateau where a modest structure was built into the mountain face, the relay station. They abandoned the vehicle at the entrance, rushing inside the facility. Unlike the research station, this outpost was designed to be operated remotely and had minimal amenities. A large communication array dominated the central room, surrounded by monitoring equipment and backup power systems. "I need to power up the transmitter," Ethan said, moving to the control panel. "It'll take a few minutes to establish a connection with the nearest outpost." Naira took up a defensive position by the entrance, her eyes never leaving the ravine they had just traversed. "They will be here soon. I will hold them off as long as possible." Ethan worked quickly, his fingers flying over the control panels as he initiated the startup sequence for the powerful transmitter. "What exactly am I transmitting?" he asked. "You said you had proof of this biological weapon." Naira reached into a concealed pocket in her suit and withdrew a small crystalline device. "This contains the complete genetic sequence of the pathogen, along with documentation of their testing protocols. Your scientists will need it to develop countermeasures." Ethan took the crystal, examining it briefly before inserting it into an adapter port on the console. The system immediately began scanning and converting the alien data format. "Bioweapon data successfully extracted," the station's computer announced. "Preparing transmission package." Outside, the whine of approaching Kavarian craft grew louder. Naira's grip tightened on her rifle. "Ethan," she said, her use of his first name catching his attention. "If I fall, you must ensure this information reaches your people." "We're both getting out of here," Ethan insisted, refusing to accept any other outcome. A series of explosions rocked the plateau outside, followed by the distinctive sound of Kavarian troops disembarking from their vessels. Naira took aim through the doorway, firing methodically at the approaching figures. "Transmission ready," the computer announced, awaiting final authorization. Ethan pressed his palm against the scanner. "Authorization granted. Priority Alpha. Transmit to all human outposts in range." The massive dish above the station pivoted, aligning itself with the nearest human communications satellite. A status bar appeared on the screen, indicating the progress of the transmission. "How long?" Naira called out between bursts of rifle fire. 3 minutes for complete transmission," Ethan replied, grabbing his sidearm and moving to join her at the entrance. "Then another 2 minutes for confirmation of receipt." "We may not have 5 minutes," Naira said grimly, ducking back as energy blasts struck the doorframe, sending sparks flying. Ethan fired his weapon, the smaller pulse blasts less effective than Naira's rifle, but still forcing the Kavarians to take cover. For a brief moment, the attackers pulled back, regrouping for another assault. "Transmission 30% complete," the computer reported calmly. "There are too many," Naira said, her tactical assessment grim. "We need a diversion." Ethan glanced around the station, his mind racing. His eyes fell on the ATV they had abandoned outside. "The fuel cells in the vehicle," he said, "if they rupture near their troops." "A sound strategy," Naira agreed, understanding immediately. Ethan took aim at the exposed fuel compartment of the ATV. It took several shots, but finally, his pulse blast struck true. The vehicle exploded with surprising force, the concussive blast sending several Kavarian soldiers flying. Flames engulfed the plateau, temporarily blocking the approach to the station. Transmission 60% complete. The respite was brief. Through the flames, more Kavarian troops advanced, their exoskeletal armor providing some protection against the heat. "We need to fall back," Naira urged, firing continuously as she retreated deeper into the station. "There's no defensible position here." They moved to the back of the facility, where a narrow corridor led to an emergency exit carved into the mountain itself. "Transmission complete," the computer announced, awaiting confirmation. "Come on," Ethan muttered, watching the status indicator blink as it waited for the distant outpost to acknowledge receipt of the critical data. The sound of Kavarian troops entering the main room of the station spurred them into action. Naira fired her last remaining energy charge, collapsing part of the corridor ceiling to slow the pursuers. "This way," Ethan said, leading the way to the emergency exit. The door opened to reveal a narrow ledge overlooking a sheer drop of several hundred meters. A thin maintenance path hugged the cliff face, barely wide enough for a single person. "Transmission confirmed," came the computer's final announcement, barely audible from their position. "Data successfully received by Outpost Gamma 17. Relief flooded through Ethan. "They got it," he told Naira. "Your information made it through." For the first time since he'd met her, Naira's expression softened. Her silver eyes met his, and something passed between them. A connection that transcended their different species and backgrounds. "Then my mission is complete," she said. "Now we survive." They began to make their way along the treacherous path, the sounds of pursuit fading as the Kavarians discovered the collapsed corridor. The twin moons of the planet cast enough light to illuminate their way, but one misstep would mean certain death on the rocks below. "If we can reach the valley on the other side," Ethan said, pressing himself against the cliff face as a gust of wind threatened his balance. "There's a subterranean river system. The Kavarians might not be able to track us there." Naira moved with natural grace despite her earlier injury, her species apparently well adapted to climbing. "You know this terrain well," she observed. "I've been mapping the entire region for 3 years," Ethan replied. "Plants don't just grow in convenient locations. Sometimes botany involves a bit of mountain climbing." A sudden explosion above them showered debris down the cliff face. The Kavarians had found another way out of the station and were now positioned on the ridge above. "Move faster," Naira urged, pushing Ethan ahead of her as energy blasts began striking the path around them. They rounded a bend in the cliff, temporarily shielded from the Kavarians' line of sight. Ahead, the path widened slightly before descending toward a dark opening in the mountainside, the entrance to the cave system Ethan had mentioned. "Almost there," Ethan encouraged. As they approached the cave entrance, a deafening roar filled the air. A massive Kavarian transport vessel rose from below the cliff edge, its searchlights sweeping across the rock face until they found the two fugitives. "Inside," Ethan shouted, diving toward the cave entrance. Naira followed, but not before an energy blast from the vessel struck near her position. The path crumbled beneath her feet, and she began to fall. In that moment, acting purely on instinct, Ethan lunged back and grabbed her arm. The sudden weight nearly pulled him over the edge as well, but he braced himself against the cave entrance, his muscles straining with the effort. "Let go," Naira commanded, her silver eyes looking up at him. "Save yourself." "Not happening," Ethan grunted, pulling with all his strength. With a supreme effort, he managed to haul her up and into the relative safety of the cave as energy blasts from the Kavarian vessel pounded the cliff face around them. They lay there for a moment, breathing heavily, the sound of falling rocks and Kavarian weapons creating a chaotic symphony outside. "You could have died," Naira said, her voice unusually soft. "So could you," Ethan replied simply. "I couldn't let that happen." Before Naira could respond, a massive blast struck directly above the cave entrance. The mountain seemed to shudder, and then the opening collapsed entirely, sealing them inside, but also cutting off their pursuers. Darkness enveloped them completely. Ethan activated the emergency light on his wrist device, its soft glow revealing Naira's face just inches from his own. In the confined space, he became acutely aware of the subtle, sweet scent of her skin, like exotic flowers and distant stars. "You've saved my life 3 times now," Naira said quietly. "By Valdorian custom, I am indebted to you until I can return the favor in equal measure." "No debt," Ethan replied, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. "That's not how humans work, at least, not this human." For a long moment, they remained there, the small light casting shadows across Naira's indigo features. The patterns on her skin seemed to pulse with a life of their own, creating constellations that Ethan found himself wanting to map and understand. "We should move deeper into the caves," he finally said, breaking the strange tension between them. "The river system can lead us to the southern valley. From there, we might be able to contact your people." As they ventured deeper into the mountain, neither spoke of what had just transpired on the cliff face. Not just the narrow escape from death, but the moment of connection that followed. Something was changing between the human botanist and the alien warrior, a bridge forming across the vast differences of their species and cultures. What had begun as a simple act of compassion, feeding a hungry, wounded warrior, was evolving into something neither of them could have anticipated. And as they made their way through the darkness, guided by the sound of flowing water ahead, both sensed that their journey together was just beginning. Beyond stars and species, the subterranean river flowed in near silence, its black surface occasionally catching the light from Ethan's wrist device. They had been following its course for hours, wading through shallow sections and swimming across deeper pools where necessary. The air in the cave system was cool and damp, heavy with mineral scents and the earthy aroma of fungi that grew in patches along the walls. "The water level is rising," Nyara observed, her voice echoing slightly in the cavern. "Is this normal?" Ethan studied the waterline marks on the cave walls. "No, it's not. The seasonal floods shouldn't start for another month." He glanced upward, where tiny droplets were beginning to fall from the ceiling with increasing frequency. Something must have happened outside. Maybe that last Kavarian blast destabilized part of the mountain. "How much farther to the exit?" Nyara asked, her tone pragmatic as always. "If my maps are correct, we should reach the southern outlet within another hour," Ethan replied. But if the water keeps rising at this rate, he didn't need to finish the thought. Both understood the implication. They were in a race against rapidly rising floodwaters in an enclosed cave system. They quickened their pace, the water now reaching their waists in sections that had been knee-deep before. The current was strengthening too, making progress more difficult. Nyara, with her superior strength, often took the lead, testing the depth ahead before allowing Ethan to follow. "There's light ahead," Nyara announced after another half-hour of arduous travel. Her enhanced vision could detect the faintest illumination long before Ethan could see it. Sure enough, as they rounded a bend in the tunnel, a distant glow became visible, the exit to the cave system. But between them and freedom lay a stretch of completely submerged passage. "We'll have to swim underwater," Ethan said, assessing the situation. "The passage resurfaces on the other side. You can see the light reflecting on the water there." Nyara nodded, her silver eyes reflecting the distant glow. "How long?" 20 meters, maybe 30. "Can you hold your breath that long?" "Valdorians can suspend respiration for up to 7 minutes when necessary," she replied matter-of-factly. "Can you?" Ethan smiled grimly. "Not quite. 3 minutes max, and that's pushing it." They stood at the edge of the submerged section, the water now chest-high and still rising. Time was against them. "Stay close to me," Nyara instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If you begin to struggle, signal immediately." Before Ethan could respond, she took his hand in hers. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through him despite the chill of the water. Her three-fingered grip was strong, reassuring. "Ready?" she asked. Ethan took several deep breaths to oxygenate his blood. "Ready." They submerged together, the cold water enveloping them completely. With his free hand, Ethan directed his wrist light ahead, illuminating the underwater passage. They swam forward, Nyara's powerful strokes pulling them along while maintaining her grip on Ethan. The passage seemed to stretch endlessly, the distant light of the exit wavering with the movement of water. Ethan's lungs began to burn after the first minute, his body demanding oxygen. He fought the instinct to breathe, focusing instead on Nyara's steady presence beside him. Just when the pressure in his chest became unbearable, they surfaced, breaking through into a small air pocket formed by an undulation in the ceiling. Ethan gasped, drawing precious oxygen into his lungs. "Almost there," Naira said, her voice calm despite the dire situation. "The exit is just beyond the next section." The water continued to rise, threatening to eliminate even this temporary refuge. They had minutes at most before the entire passage would be submerged. "One more push," Ethan said, once his breathing had steadied. "Let's go." They submerged again, swimming with renewed urgency. The current had strengthened further, now working against them as it flowed deeper into the cave system. Ethan kicked harder, his muscles protesting the exertion after hours of physical strain. Suddenly, something large and heavy struck him from behind, a log or boulder carried by the current. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs and tore his hand from Naira's grip. He tumbled in the churning water, disoriented and rapidly running out of air. In the confused swirl of bubbles and silt, he lost sight of both Naira and the exit. Panic began to set in as his oxygen-deprived brain struggled to determine which way was up. His lungs burned fiercely, the instinct to breathe nearly overwhelming his rational mind. Then, through the murky water, he felt Naira's strong hands gripping his shoulders. With powerful strokes, she propelled them both forward, fighting against the current that threatened to drag them deeper into the flooded caverns. The light grew brighter, and suddenly they were breaking the surface, emerging into the open air of a small grotto. Sunlight filtered down through an opening above, illuminating the crystal-clear pool they found themselves in. Ethan coughed violently, expelling water from his lungs as Naira pulled him to a rocky shelf at the edge of the pool. "Breathe," she commanded, supporting his weight with surprising gentleness. Slowly, as his breathing normalized, Ethan became aware of their surroundings. The grotto was beautiful, a hidden gem carved by water and time. Sunlight refracted through crystals embedded in the walls, casting rainbow patterns across the chamber. Various plant species that Ethan had never documented grew in abundance here, thriving in this isolated ecosystem. "This place is incredible," he murmured, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his exhaustion. "You nearly drowned, and your first thought is about the flora." Naira's tone held a mixture of disbelief and something that might have been admiration. "You are a strange human, Ethan Hayes." "So I've been told," Ethan replied with a weak smile. "Thank you for saving me." "We are now even," Naira said, though her expression suggested she didn't truly believe in such a transactional approach to their relationship anymore. One life debt paid. They rested on the rocky shelf, allowing their bodies to recover from the ordeal. Outside, through the opening in the grotto's ceiling, they could see that night was falling. The twin moons were rising, casting silvery light that mingled with the last rays of the setting suns. "The Kavarians will still be searching for us," Naira said eventually, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. "We should move once you've recovered your strength." "Where to?" Ethan asked. "The research station is compromised, and the relay station is probably destroyed." "We need to make contact with my people," Naira said, her expression turning thoughtful. "There is a Valdorian monitoring outpost at the edge of this system. If we can find a way to boost a signal from your emergency communicator, we might reach them." Ethan considered this. The Southern Valley has an abandoned mining facility. The colony was evacuated when the company went bankrupt, but some of the equipment might still be operational. It's about a day's journey from here. "Then that's our destination," Naira decided. She rose to her feet, extending a hand to help Ethan up. "Can you walk?" "I'll manage," he assured her, though his body ached from their ordeal. "Lead the way, Commander." They found a natural path leading out of the grotto, emerging onto a lush hillside overlooking a vast valley. The landscape was dramatically different from the research station's location. Wetter, more verdant, with towering trees that reminded Ethan of Earth's ancient redwoods. As they made their way down the hillside, Ethan noticed that Naira seemed distracted, her silver eyes constantly scanning the horizon. "What is it?" he asked. "Do you sense Kavarians nearby?" "No," she replied, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I am. Processing our situation. What about it? Naira paused, choosing her words carefully. On my world, warriors are conditioned to view all encounters through the lens of tactical advantage. Relationships are assessed based on their utility to the mission. And, Ethan prompted when she fell silent again. And I find that I can no longer view our association in purely tactical terms, she admitted. This is unsettling. Ethan suppressed a smile. Coming from Naira, this was practically a declaration of emotional attachment. Is that a bad thing? It is unexpected, she said. Valdorian warriors are not encouraged to form personal connections during missions. It clouds judgment. Yet here we are, Ethan observed, still alive despite impossible odds. Maybe there's tactical value in connection after all. Naira considered this perspective, her head tilting slightly in that now familiar gesture of contemplation. Perhaps, she conceded, your human perspective is illuminating. They continued their journey through the night, making good progress under the light of the twin moons. By dawn, they had reached the edge of the abandoned mining colony, a collection of prefabricated structures nestled in a shallow valley. Stay alert, Naira warned as they approached. Abandoned human settlements often attract scavengers. The colony appeared deserted, with no signs of recent activity. Many of the buildings had been partially reclaimed by the native vegetation, vines and moss creeping over the metal exteriors. They made their way to what appeared to be the main communications facility, a larger structure with a collapsed transmission dish nearby. Inside, the equipment was in surprisingly good condition, protected from the elements by the sealed building. Dust covered everything, but when Ethan activated the emergency power cells, several systems hummed to life. The main transmitter is down, Ethan observed, examining the control panels, but the auxiliary system might work if we can repair it. The dish outside is damaged, but we could reconfigure the alignment to focus the signal. What do you need? Naira asked, already scanning the facility for useful components. Power cells, primarily, and some way to boost the signal strength. Ethan's eyes lit up as he remembered something. The mining excavators used focused energy beams. If we could salvage the emission array. They spent the next several hours scavenging parts from throughout the colony. Naira's strength proved invaluable as they dismantled heavy equipment to extract the components Ethan needed. By midday, they had assembled a makeshift communication system on the facility's roof, with the salvaged excavator array serving as an improvised signal amplifier. Will it work? Naira asked as Ethan made the final adjustments. In theory, he replied. We'll be transmitting on Valdorian frequencies using human technology and alien components. It's not exactly standard procedure. Nothing about our situation has been standard, Naira pointed out. Ethan couldn't argue with that. He connected the final circuit and stepped back. Ready when you are. Naira inputted a series of codes into the communication console, a priority distress signal that would alert any Valdorian vessels in the vicinity. The makeshift transmitter hummed loudly, drawing more power than Ethan had anticipated. Sparks flew from one of the jury-rigged connections, but the system held. Signal away, Ethan announced. Now we wait. They took shelter inside the facility, establishing a watch rotation. As night fell, Ethan found himself alone with his thoughts, while Naira patrolled the perimeter. The events of the past week played through his mind. How a routine day cataloging fungi had transformed into a desperate fight for survival and potentially the fate of humanity. And then there was Naira. In just days, she had gone from an unknown alien to, what exactly? A comrade, a friend, something more. The thought both intrigued and unsettled him. His contemplation was interrupted by Naira's return. She moved silently, her indigo skin nearly blending with the shadows. The perimeter is secure, she reported. No signs of Kavarian scouts. They might believe we died in the cave system, Ethan suggested. Perhaps, but Kavarians are thorough. They will not abandon the hunt easily. Nayara settled beside him, closer than necessary in the empty room. For several minutes, they sat in companionable silence, the soft glow of the emergency lights casting gentle shadows. "You should eat," Ethan said eventually, offering her one of the native fruits they had gathered during their journey.